Hello, BookTube. Much to my delight, and much to your misery, I have fallen into the habit this week of talking about a comic book each day this week. It started off with David Wiley, as most trouble does. We're talking about the X-Men. But then, by random chance, I kept talking about comics all week, and now I'm in the habit of doing so, even though nobody watches these videos. I think I want to finish out the week, at least, and then things will go back to normal. So today, for Superboy Saturday, we are turning to my favorite comic book character, Superboy. Not a clone, not Clark Kent's gay son, the adventures of Superman when he was a boy. Superboy was an immensely popular character for decades, sold better than almost anything else that DC put out, and these were the adventures of Clark Kent when he was a muscular teenager in a spandex costume as a superpowered individual in Smallville, Kansas, where he did chores at the family store and went to high school and mooned over pretty girls and did his homework and whatnot. But he also saved the world from alien invasion and had all sorts of monsters to fight. He was world famous. He was intergalactically famous as Superboy in Smallville. And these adventures were wonderful. Absolutely wonderful. My great-grandfather, back in 1965, never missed an issue. And the issue that we're going to talk about today is Superboy number 119, Duel of the Superboys. And there we have our hunky teen hero there. We have two of them, in fact, and they are split. They're both saying, one is saying, I've got to find my other self and destroy him at once. And the other one is saying, I must search for my counterpart, then destroy him. Notice one is using supervision and the other is flying. And the reason for that is because they don't have the same powers. The gimmick of the story is that Superboy's full set of superpowers has been split in half. So one of them, this Superboy has invulnerability, supervision, and super breath. Whereas the other one has flying powers, super strength, and super hearing. I know who got the better side of that deal in my own opinion. And you might think, well, Superboy 119, that's 12 cents. 12 cents was an hour of chores, 2 hours of chores. It was no small investment. It was a big thing to do, but God knows what a new good condition copy of this comic would cost you now. Probably instead of 12 cents, $100? Probably something like that. But you might think, if you are conditioned by the less is more attitude of the 21st century, that in a comic book like this, Duel of the Superboys, you've seen this cover, you're immediately going to open it and get to that story. But no, every issue of Superboy had multiple stories in it. And the first story that we get in this issue is about Super Baby, who had all sorts of adventures back when comic book writers thought that babies said me am. For some reason, Super Baby talks like a kind of brain-damaged Bizarro baby. All babies do. They all say me am, me wanty, that sort of thing. Needless to say, my great-grandfather back in 1965 had very little patience for Super Baby events. Super Baby stories aren't interesting. But then we have The Millionaire of Smallville. That was the next story where Clark Kent becomes a toff, wears a hat, and has all sorts of my good man moments and whatnot. We don't have to worry much about that one either because we want to move on to the story. We get to the Smallville mail sack. Let's see what we have here in terms of letters. Anything from the American Midwest, perhaps? No? No. All right, then we get to the main story, the Duel of the Superboys. Notice something very refreshing here. No artist is mentioned and no writer is mentioned. There are no credits for this story. Because nobody writes comic books and nobody draws them. Instead, the whole point is on you, the child, in a small town dry goods store in the American Midwest. If you are a no-good teenager who is buying Superboy, the whole point is that it's a new Superboy adventure. The focus is on the character. The focus is on you, the reader. The focus is not on the writer and the status of his divorce or the extent of his cocaine addiction. It's just a Superboy adventure. It doesn't have a writer or an artist. Anyway, it starts off we jump right into the action because these stories are only a few pages long. We jump right into the action with Dr. Diablo, we've never seen before, is helping out the anti-Superboy gang which is the young version of the anti-Superman gang that readers have already encountered in Action Comics and Superman. We've already encountered the anti-Superboy gang in Superboy as well. They hate Superboy. Can't stand him. So they're gangsters, basically. They all wear fedoras. But they are gangsters. They don't have any superpowered members. They don't have any superpowers of their own. They don't have any super weaponry, except for Dr. Diablo, who manages in Smallville to create an android duplicate of Superboy. That he just makes an android duplicate of Superboy and uses. We're told that it's kryptonite-powered invention. That's going to become a problem. They're in a cave. All the bad guys in the Superboy comics are always in caves. That's going to become a problem. But we're told that it's kryptonite-powered, and that maybe that's a kind of left-handed gesture at how this rinky-dink Dr. Diablo can create an android double of Superboy. But he not only creates an android double of Superboy, he then transfers half of Superboy's power set to the android double. If I were an upstanding member of the anti-Superboy gang, which of course I'm not, I would rat them out in a minute. But if I were, and I was standing there, his name is Nicky, in my slouch hat with my gun under my vest, I would say, hey, Dr. Diablo, I'd probably call him Doc. If you have the ability to siphon half of Superboy's powers, why not siphon them all? We don't really want an android running around one way or another. We want you to take Superboy out of commission. If you can take half his powers, why not take all of his powers? But he doesn't. Instead, he takes half. Now, those of you who have been trained by the Stan Lee virus, which was already taking effect in Marvel Comics at the time when this came out, but it was still small and localized enough so that you could ignore it. It certainly would not appear in Superboy for a while, if ever. If you were tainted by the Stan Lee virus, you would say at this point, what? That doesn't make any sense. Superboy's an organic being. He gets his superpowers, all of them, from the fact that he was on a low-gravity planet with a yellow sun. They're not separate from each other any more than your ability to walk is separate from your ability to play the piano. They're all you. You're an organic being. You can't take away his super strength and leave his invulnerability. You can't take away his super breath and leave his super hearing. They're all part of who he is. You're not supposed to think that way. Okay? You're not supposed to think that way. Never mind that there's no way to do that. There's no way to isolate that. It's just supposed to be fun. Okay? How would each of those Superboys deal with the world if they had only those superpowers and no others? Obviously, the Superboy that can fly can get around a lot easier. The one who can't fly is going to need to fly somehow. Anyway, Dr. Diablo has a TV screen that is huge. No TV that big existed in 1965. He has a huge TV screen watching Superboy fighting criminals when he decides to siphon powers. My monitor shows Superboy capturing some robbers. Their bullets are bouncing off his invulnerable skin, now to activate the transfer ray that will steal away his powers and transport them into the android duplicate. But just as he's starting the transfer, the machine malfunctions. See, it's blown a gasket. So it only transfers part of Superboy's powers, just half of them. Superboy realizes this because he feels pain. When he blocks a bullet, one of the bullets just grazed my hand. I feel pain. Impossible. I'll try not to let on, though. He can still fly. But he feels pain. And we get the android in Dr. Diablo's lair, who is demonstrating the powers that he has. Notice, he's waking up from the table. His first word apparently is yes, master, because he apparently knows that he is a subservient creature to Dr. Diablo. I noticed that the others didn't. The other powers, let's see here. Superboy lost some of his powers. Super Android, turn your back to the monitor. Describe what Chief Parker is doing now. And he uses supervision to look and see what Chief Parker is doing while the Doctor and Nikki watch on the screen. So they know that he has supervision. And he has super breath. He freezes a cloud into ice. And he's also invulnerable. They throw a grenade at him to find out. Look, this is probably around the era where it was the don't try this at home school. And Nikki is confused by this. It's miraculous to look at. Apparently, the super android's costume is invulnerable. How that would be, it should be just cloth. But Nikki says, I don't get it. Your ray only transferred some of Superboy's powers into his android duplicate. How come? Unfortunately, says Dr. Diablo, the ray device short-circuited The machine was wrecked before it could siphon away all of Superboy's powers. You possess enough powers to obliterate Superboy. Attach this device to your belt buckle. It will help you to accomplish that purpose by giving you a special ability Superboy never had. Now go on. Create some super mischief that will lure him to you, and then kill him. And the poor android says, I shall obey. So his job, the very first thing he learns in the world, is to kill his duplicate. But he has to use a flying platform to do it. The Superboy, the anti-Superboy gang, never makes use of the technology of a flying platform. You'd think they would, but they never do. He has this sort of flying scooter, and they fight. And sure enough, it's a pretty even fight. The one has super strength, but the other has invulnerability. But there's an extra thing. In the pouch of his cape, the Superboy android has green kryptonite. And Superboy is at first unimpressed. Are you kidding me? That must be fake kryptonite, or it would harm you too. And the fake Superboy throws it at the real Superboy, who utters the indelible piece of dialogue, "Op!" because it is real. And it does affect him. And it's in panels like this that you can sort of sense the artistic hand of Kurt Swan. But it fells Superboy. And the android says, the reason Green K can't harm me, but is killing you, is because the protective kryptonite nullifier I wear. The device that he's wearing on his belt, you saw it on the cover, but you see it here as well, is a kryptonite nullifier. And that's why the green kryptonite isn't affecting the Superboy android. But something happens in this moment. The Superboy android can't go through with it. He instead drills the kryptonite into the ground, allowing Superboy to recover. And Dr. Diablo is infuriated when he's watching this. Blast it all! Something I didn't foresee has happened. The transfer device also transferred some of Superboy's decency into the android. Fortunately, I placed a mental block in his mind which will keep him from betraying my hideout. And Nikki says, what a shame you failed. Okay, and the two Superboys shake hands, and Superboy brings his counterpart. Notice Superboy can fly, his counterpart cannot. They leave the flying device behind. Maybe the kids at Smallville High will find it and play around with it. They leave this flying device behind, and they go to Superboy's lair underneath Ma and Pa Kent's home. And Ma and Pa Kent immediately say, well, I guess we have two sons now. We'll adopt this android. They never name him, but they do give him a natty set of pajamas. And he is totally unaccustomed to the human world and says he sees Ma Kent kissing Clark Kent and says it must be some sign of affection. Then he says, she's kissing me goodnight too. Strange, I feel happy. Yet I want to cry. Only being an android, I can't. Any of you who are wondering at this point if a certain comic book artist or writer named Roy Thomas for Marvel Comics read these comics when he was a kid, I think you can retire that question. What is one of the most famous Marvel comic book titles of all time? Single issue title of all time. You've got This Man, This Monster, and yesterday we saw To Love, Honor, and Destroy, but there's another very famous comic book title. Some of you older fans will know what I'm talking about right away. Even an android can cry. I think it's safe to say that a lot of Marvel writers read these issues. They probably grew up with them. That old, just like my great-grandfather did. The android says, she's kissing me. Good night. Strange, I feel happy, yet I want to cry. Only being an android, I can't. And Clark is watching, his exact double, who I might note, these are mighty handsome young men. Anyway, Clark's watching and says his android heart is touched by the emotion of a mother's love, which he's never known. I feel like he's my twin brother. And they sit in Clark's room in their pajamas, and Clark talks about how Lana Lang is always trying to ferret out that he is Superboy. They decide to play a prank on her where Clark Kent and Superboy are seen at the same time, so she has to put that suspicion to rest forever. Of course, Lana has seen Superboy robots at the same time as Clark innumerable times. She still has that suspicion, as well she should. But they play this prank together, and then look at this panel. They laugh about it together. They're having a wonderful time. They're friends. Superboy and the Superboy android are friends. And when they have their pajamas on, so they go to bed. And then they wake up the next day and play this prank on Lana. But you'll notice the Superboy android still has the anti-kryptonite device on his belt. When they put on their costumes together, they go out and he's still wearing that. And Dr. Diablo is still watching. And he is furious at this. Unfortunately, his gigantic monitor screen TV has a limited range. As he said, if only my monitor's range weren't limited, I could have spied on Superboy's home and learned his identity. He isn't watching that. He's in Smallville. But apparently this cathode ray thing doesn't extend to the Kent family home. And they are playing disguise. They're Superboy, the real Superboy, is talking to the clone about what it is to have a secret identity, about what it's like. They're back in the bedroom. That round thing on the table there is an alarm clock. You young people have to Google that, because your phone does literally everything that every piece of device in this comic book can do. Your one device, your phone, does that. For all I know, there's an app on your phone that will actually create an Android duplicate of Superboy. The Superboy android is saying, oops, I forgot. Today it's my turn to be meek, mild Clark Kent. Is this expression, meek and mild, enough? And Clark Kent, the real Clark Kent, says, try a little harder. Think of a kryptonite pork chop. That always does the trick for me. And they go about their day. They are stopping crimes and helping people. But Dr. Diablo wants to destroy his android. He is furious that his android has betrayed him and become good. So from a distance, he wants to destroy them both using green kryptonite, negating the anti-kryptonite device that he had. Eventually, Superboy finds a way to save his new friend by dragging him away from the deadly kryptonite radiation. But it didn't happen fast enough, because the android dies. Why that would be true? Once the android is exposed to kryptonite radiation without the anti-kryptonite device on his belt, he is fatally wounded and dies. Now, Superboy and Superman after him sometimes spends, a whole week in Vegas in direct proximity with green kryptonite. We saw that in that Lois Lane adventure in Superman Family, where Superman is being poisoned by green kryptonite by those aliens at his Fortress of Solitude for the whole time it takes Plan L to work. That's a long time, a very long time, at least a few days. Apparently, the exposure to this green kryptonite is enough to kill the android Superboy right away, when it shouldn't have any effect on him at all. Because he's not from Krypton. Obviously, kryptonite shouldn't affect him in any way. He is made in a lab. And he's made with kryptonite, we're told, or powered by it in some way. Kryptonite should have no effect on him whatsoever. But the minute he dies, his powers revert back to the original Superboy. Why that would be true, why the original Superboy isn't permanently halved in power, or unless Dr. Diablo transfers the power back to him. That's the way I would think it would happen, but nope. He gets all his powers back, and he smashes into Dr. Diablo's lair, and he brings them both to prison. The end. the Superboy android dies here. He says goodbye and dies. He said, glad you didn't betray me, brother, and says goodbye. Pardon the Indy 500 noise in the background. We have the windows open because it's a temperate day, but it's a weekend, so everybody's revving their engines. And Superboy's last thought in his thought balloon here is, at least I've got all my powers back, but my folks and I will always miss my android twin. And that's it. That's all we get. We move on from there to all sorts of in-price ads, in-house ads for all these things. But that's the end of the story of the duplicate Superboy. And it's something to conjure with. I did, in fact, conjure with it. And I have an epic, ongoing, apparently endless piece of fan fiction that I'm doing about the Legion of Superheroes, the group of superheroes, of superpowered teenagers, 1,000 years in Superboy's future. He often goes to the future and has adventures with them. And they plucked him out of the past in order to be their sort of 20th century mascot and their heroic inspiration. And in my massive fan fiction epic, the Legion keeps finding beings, superpowered beings, both in their own continuity and at other periods in time. Superpowered teenagers, but not just Superboy. And one of the characters who is in my Legion story, another Legion member, is that android. Who of course he isn't dead, an android that was made in a lab. kryptonite radiation isn't going to affect him the way it does an organic being. He exists. I give him a name. This story very consciously does not give him a name. We know that he has emotions. We know that the Kents love him, but they don't give him a name. The way they do, for instance, another superpowered teenager who shows up in Smallville, Mon-El. They don't give him a name, but we know that he has an interior life. I decided, well, he has an array of superpowers, and it's an interesting combination of them. So he will be a member of my Legion, along with a whole bunch of other beings that show up in Superboy in these old issues. It's been a great deal of fun. Not only heroes, but villains as well. I've mined these old issues for all sorts of stuff like that, and also old issues of the Legion itself. But that's our comic book for today, Duel of the Superboys. What would happen if we took 8 superpowers from Superboy, or 6 superpowers, and split them in half? How could they think their way out of this? And it turns out that is only a gesture. The story only gestures in that direction, because they end up being friends, and it ends up being touching. Except for Dr. Diablo and Nikki, who go to jail. You could ask at the conclusion of this story, okay, Dr. Diablo and Nikki go to jail, but what's the crime? What crime can you prove here? Attempted homicide of Superboy? Maybe would be the crime, but they certainly didn't commit any crime by creating a superpowered android. There is no law back in 1965 about anything like that. Very interesting story. I would love to know if Dr. Diablo ever shows up again. I don't, off the top of my head, remember. And if it was easy for him to create one Superboy android that siphoned powers off Superboy, why not rebuild your device? The original short-circuited, but presumably you have blueprints. Why not rebuild the device and go at it again? Anyway, a wonderful story, and you're not supposed to think about any of that. Even though the Stan Lee virus was rampaging over at Marvel in 1965, you're not supposed to think about it. You're just supposed to have fun with, well, you've got these superpowers, but not these. And I did have fun. And I hope you did too. I had fun revisiting this. We'll move on tomorrow. In the meantime, I will wrap this up for you 2 comic book fans out there, and I'll be back. Thank you, BookTube.